The NATO alliance was always designed to keep America safe, to keep our alliance strong and our allies in Europe safe. That's always been the purpose of it. Self-evidently so from 1949, especially all the way through the early 90s. That's exactly what it did. It was very, very effective, very successful. Definitely was cost-effective for the United States. It helped keep war down. It helped keep Europe solid and unified. And it absolutely helped in American vital national interests, keep things on the track. But now then, conditions are very, very different. And of course, in just a couple of weeks from now, little less than 3 weeks from now, in Washington, D.C., NATO is going to assemble for the 75th anniversary of NATO, and they want to make a big deal out of it about how great it is, et cetera. But now then, unlike 1949, it's a lot less clear about how NATO keeps us safer. And in fact, as today's guest is going to show us, some evidence shows that we're actually doing the opposite for American national security interests now, is that the proposed expansion of NATO may actually be making us less safe. And we have Jason Beardsley on today, back on the show. Jason, welcome back. Director of Vet Initiatives at Stand Together and former senior advisor in the Trump administration, and a combat veteran himself. Welcome back to the show.
Always great to be with you for these difficult discussions, and we'll just reflect on our experience and see if we can unwind a few things.
Yeah, and we're gonna, and ironically, a lot of this isn't that complicated in my view. A lot of things, if you look at the evidence, if you actually look at the reality on the ground, I think some things become pretty clear if you're willing to look at them as they are. And that is one of the bigger problems, is that so many of our senior officials in America are not willing to look at things as they are. Now, we're going to get into just a second some of the comments, so I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. But you've recently written a piece in Newsweek where you're talking exactly about this. American lives are at stake if NATO doesn't set a better course. So it's not like that it needs to be disbanded today and it doesn't have any chance. The problem is how it's being done, I think. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk about just kind of the genesis behind why you wrote this. Why do you feel it needed to be written?
Well, I appreciate the opening. And one, it's I think if you listen to our leadership, including the White House themselves, they're proposing something along the same lines by saying that if we do not do this, meaning war against Russia through Ukraine, they're saying NATO lives are at stake, which in their terms means Russia is going to then proceed to roll into places like one of the Baltic republics, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, maybe, perhaps Poland. These are really big, grand themes. But you've heard the White House talk over and over again about if we don't have Ukraine beat Russia, then it's NATO lives that are going to have to go to war with Russia. So let's start with that frame first. They've already proposed this. What I'm saying is the actual usage or involvement of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance in supporting this proxy war with Russia has the opportunity to draw us further into the conflict, whether it's directly in Ukraine or as a consequence, as a second order or third order effect coming out of what happens next. And again, we can either listen to the White House or you can listen to those of us who have been warning, including the former director or the current director of the CIA, who warned in 2008, if NATO continues to provoke Russia in Ukraine, this will be a red line for Russia and will cause this type of activity. So lives are at stake. NATO trainers are on the ground right now in Ukraine. So at this present moment, and even earlier in this, American lives are already at risk in proximal combat relations. So that does not go down or decrease as we increase our involvement.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is counterintuitive, if not just contradictive to what's actually going on the ground. And let's see what some of the statements are. So heading into now, getting ready for this 75th big shindig, here's what State Department spokesman Matt Miller has to say.
Ukraine's future is in NATO. It will become a member of NATO. We have made that clear. And we will continue to work with our allies in NATO about the exact bridge to membership and what that looks like and what Ukraine has to do.
Okay, so here's one of the big problems I've got with his comments there generally, but generally across the board with all of this effort in here. What he doesn't say, and what I've not seen any member of the White House or some of these others say that makes any sense is why. Why is Ukraine's future in NATO? How are you going to get NATO documents authorized or fulfilled, which say you don't invite anyone into NATO unless they have all their internal disputes resolved and all their border disputes resolved, neither of which is even possible in the foreseeable future. And I'm talking decades into the future. So given that, why do we want to talk so emphatically, so just religiously, obsessively, one might say, that they're coming in when even our basic documents are not met?
Well, I think we can look back at history. The NATO expansion begins in the 90s. Remember, we fought in the Cold War. That was the NATO alliance purpose against the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union, the increase of the Iron Curtain. Well, once the Iron Curtain came down, we started inviting in the 90s Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic into NATO. So that was an expansion. By the time we got to 2004, we started opening up more countries, Romania, Bulgaria. There was about 7, I think, at the time. All the while, we were promising or promoting the idea, I should say, to the Russians that NATO is not expanding. It's not coming eastward. It's not going to be on your doorstep. But then in 2008, during the Bucharest summit, we actually promised that the future of Georgia and Ukraine, Georgia, a southern republic, and Ukraine now on their western front, but the east of Europe, were both had its future in NATO. So this has been a long time coming. And then we have these competing policies where the United States supports democracy, but during the 2014 protests in Maidan in Ukraine, when Yanukovych, who was more pro-Russian, disagreed with the European Union, the United States was involved in backside negotiations. We have the leaked audio between the ambassador at the time, Jeffrey Pyatt, and Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State at the time, talking about who they wanted to be involved in the Ukrainian government and why. And their reasoning was they wanted someone who was going to be separate and distinct from Russia. They wanted a U.S. ally. Well, they got the U.S. ally, and the next thing that happened was Russia went into Crimea. So they annexed Crimea. All the while now, the United States is increasing weapons and lethal aid and defensive aid to the Ukraine. By 2018, 2019, we start passing laws to get lethal aid into Ukraine so they can take the war against Russia. All this time, we've said the future of Ukraine is in NATO. So the whole point is to watch the historical timeline. You can see that certain elements, certain factors in the United States have been issuing and begging for this confrontation so they could expand NATO onto the doorsteps of Russia. Well, they've got that, and that's where we are. And that's why you hear their concerns now. Again, the future of Ukraine is in NATO. They're not giving us the reason. You asked what was the reason. You'd have to guess. I mean, you'd have to have, somebody that could read the minds of our political elite. But here's what they say. They say it's about sovereignty. They say it's about democracy. They say it's about respecting the territorial rights of Ukraine. So then you have to go back and look at, well, what has been said on paper? Again, the Minsk Agreement back in 2015 guaranteed the sovereign territorial rights of Ukraine, and the United States and Western allies just got through saying we weren't serious about that. We were using that as a means to build the army, buy time so we could attack Russia. So you can look at our words, but you'll have to see there's duplicity and there's changing and contradicting policy along the way. So Americans rightly should be asking the question, is this?
And look, even on the surface of it, even on these alleged claims, you don't have a military alliance. You don't expand a military alliance to bring democracy, so-called, or territorial integrity. That's just not how it works. I mean, if you have an issue right there, you don't bring an alliance in after the fact, because now then all you're doing is dragging everybody else into a war that doesn't have a border issue, that doesn't have a fight with Russia, nuclear armed Russia. And I mean, it's just absurd on the face value of why you would want to do that, to take the enormous risk. It's like and I'm not just picking on Miller here. It's obviously ultimately Biden, and then many of the heads of state of European states like Macron and Schultz and several of these others. Rishi Sunak is a big advocate of this. They just want to do it. They just don't seem to have a plan and a rationale to how it can be done without actually causing more violence, not less.
I think they're okay with this because we talked about this before, but who's underwriting the risk? Who's taking on the actual financial burden of this? It's the United States. Nobody in Europe cares that American taxpayers can't afford their grocery, can't afford their fuel, are trying to struggle to put their families in secure positions. Nobody's concerned about that except for the American taxpayer. But in Europe, it's fine. If you're in Lithuania, if you're in Estonia, if you're in one of these eastern provinces on the doorstep of Russia, you are not worried that the United States is underwriting this. It's we, the Americans, who are worried. I represent veterans across this country who are concerned. I was on the train yesterday from New York back to D.C. A lady who worked 20 years at the VA, Veterans Administration. I empathize. I worked there myself. She was complaining to her coworker that all this money is going to Ukraine when American veterans are still homeless, are still waiting for benefits, are waiting in line for their health. And here we are spending billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on some war in Europe that we are told is supposed to be the last bulwark of democracy or something. I'm not sure how they make that connection, but somehow they do. So again, I think Americans and taxpayers particularly have the right to ask, is this accidental? Is this purposeful?
Yeah.
Are we being told duplicitous lies, or are these just people who are incompetent?
Yeah, or maybe even not incompetent, but have an ulterior motive. I think might be something more valid to ask. So we just talked about what Matt Miller didn't say. He didn't say how, what the purpose of with anything like this. Doesn't even give any ridiculous statements. Just says, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Here is John Kirby actually putting out another level of problem where he's saying that this is something we want to do, but before they join, there's this little thing that needs to happen first. Watch this.
It has not been a very clear pathway. When would they be able to do the action plan that they can get on?
First, they got to win this war. Right? They got to win the war first. And so, number one, we're doing everything we can to make sure they can do that. Then when the war's over, no matter what it looks like, they're still going to have a long border with Russia and a legitimate security threat to the Ukrainian people. That's why the president at the G7 signed our bilateral security agreement, joining some other 14, 15 other countries that have done the same thing, to make sure that for the long haul, Ukraine's defense industrial base can continue to make sure that they have what they need to defend themselves, and that includes assistance from the United States. That's the long haul. That will help them defend themselves while they work on the necessary things they have to do, like any member of the alliance has to work on, for instance, on corruption, before they can apply for NATO membership. But we do believe that NATO is in Ukraine's future.
I mean, look, this has been going on since at least February 2014 is when the violence kicked off, and all this stuff since then. So this is a full 10 years in the offing so far. Now we're into the 11th year, and all we got to do is end the war first and get Ukraine to win and Russia to lose, and then we can get. I mean, what? Come on, man! I mean, that is nonsense.
Boy, these are very hard to listen to. All we had to do in Iraq was win the war. All we had to do in Afghanistan was win the war. All we had to do in Vietnam was win the war. When you hear these politicians talk like this, you almost believe that they believe it themselves. But there's no reasonable, feasible way that a win is something in the cards for Ukraine. Now, it depends on how you define the word win, which notice they're not going to do. If win means, hey, we negotiate the settlement here on the Dnieper River, you get the eastern oblast, we'll keep the west. Okay, maybe they can have a quote unquote win, but they're not defining that. Secondly, they're making a promise and they're writing a check with the American taxpayers' dollars to fund the long-term defense industrial base for Ukraine. And for those who don't know what that means, and I'm sure everybody does, that means we just guaranteed in front of our manufacturing, in front of our labor, in front of American unions, we're guaranteeing the support of pensions in Ukraine, of the defense industrial base in Ukraine, which means manufacturing, supply chains, and economic supremacy for Ukraine before we're even looking at the United States. And John Kirby, who is an admiral from the Navy, knows extremely cogently, very well, that the United States Navy is suffering because our own defense industrial base has fallen flat on supplying the number of ships, the number of manpower, the number of engines, the number of deck time, and all the things that are needed to keep the Navy competitive with our near-peer rivals like China. We're not doing. So why are we promising to do it for somebody else's country?
Yeah, that's certainly a question I would like answered. Although you can't ask that question because then it's self-evident that that's a wrong question to even ask, and the answer is a hell no if they got there. So we don't want to talk about that. They want to keep everything in emotion and decked and Russia evil. So we have to do this. We have to do this. Don't ask any hard questions. Just got to pay a little suffering here. It's just what it takes to succeed for your safety. This is for your safety.
Right.
But now here's part of the problem here. I mean, there's many. You just talked about a few of them. But when he says Russia has to lose or Ukraine has to win, what he's not talking about is what that means on the Russian side of this equation. Well, for the benefit of our viewers, we're going to show you what the other side of that equation, how they view what it means to lose. Here's Vladimir Putin.
Westerners are constantly raising the stakes and escalating the situation step by step.
They are raising the stakes, yes.
In your view, what goal are they pursuing? What are they trying to achieve? Could this be some kind of provocation, trying to provoke you into something?
Indeed, we see and observe this. As you said, they are constantly raising the stakes, escalating the situation. They probably hope that at some point we will get scared. But at the same time, they talk about wanting to achieve a strategic defeat of Russia on the battlefield. I think those who think this way, and even more so those who say this, are making another big mistake. What does this mean for Russia? For Russia, it means the end of its statehood. It means the end of the 1,000-year history of the Russian state. I think this is clear to everyone. So the question arises, why should we be afraid? Isn't it better to go all the way then? This is basic formal logic.
See, this is crucial here. He views losing as the loss of statehood. And in case anybody doesn't understand what that means, because he didn't say it, he didn't make the direct correlation there, but he did on D-Day.
Американцы — единственная страна, Соединенные Штаты, которая использовала ядерное оружие во Второй мировой войне. Хиросима, Нагасаки — 20 килотонн. Наше тактическое ядерное оружие — 70-75 килотонн. Это такое ядерное тактическое оружие. Давайте не доводить не только до использования, а даже до угрозы использования. На Западе считают, что Россия никогда этого не использует. У нас же есть ядерная доктрина. Посмотрите, что написано. Если чьи-то действия будут угрожать нашему суверенитету и территориальной целостности, мы считаем для себя возможным использовать все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Нельзя относиться к этому легко, поверхностно. Нужно относиться профессионально.
So you have the U.S. stated objective is to make Russia lose. And you have Russia saying the same thing we would say under similar circumstances, that to lose means the end of my statehood. Ergo, I will use my nuclear weapons to prevent that outcome. So you have us on a path, Kirby, Biden, that says if we succeed in what we're trying to do, it's going to be nuclear war. This is why the title of this episode here is that NATO is endangering American lives, and why your article in Newsweek stood out to me, because I think you're recognizing some of these absurd directions we're taking are not helping us.
That's right. They're opening the beginning stages of what is a continued escalation of conflict. And some of what you heard Putin talk about there, and of course the very fact that you play Putin now makes us propagandists and Putin stooges, right? This is the statement that you get in the West. You can't even listen to what the other side is saying because you'll be accused of propaganda. But I think it is important to listen. We've always done that. Historically, leaders have to look at the other side. So we do the best we can to analyze it. So here's a little bit of what you saw there. It's clever politics on both sides. In the United States, we frame this, President Biden, the White House, Department of Defense, as This is about defending democracy, right? It's a generic concept, but it means the idea that in the world there's democracy is reliant on Ukraine winning. So they've pinned their hopes of a generic, ambiguous, let's call it the effort of democracy to exist on this war. Now, Putin does a one-upsmanship in the political realm and says, okay, great, you're going to defend democracy. Let me tell you what's at stake on my side. National sovereignty, territorial integrity. Notice, though, he's stealing and cribbing from the U.S. administration, who is talking about the territorial sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and he's using that to then make the case that Russia has an international claim to its own sovereignty and its own territorial integrity, which they will surmise is the oblast in Donetsk and Luhansk province. So what they're really saying, what you heard Putin really saying is, okay, we're not here to entirely take over Kyiv and the western part of Ukraine. But if you want to oust us from these two provinces that we've now been in control of since 2014 and really earlier, almost tentatively, then we're going to consider that an increase or an invasion against our territory. We're going to consider that about our sovereignty. And what they've done, what Putin has done, is shifted this debate from one of a generic democracy, defensive democracy in the generic form, which is NATO's go-to, to a defensive, entirely sovereign territorial claim. So in that case, he wins. But what's behind that threat, that rhetorical, is what you're saying. We have nuclear weapons. He's making the suggestion that if you take away our own territory, which we'll see as a collapse of the state, we have to respond as if it's an existential threat. Notice how the United States has framed the Ukraine loss as an existential threat. We're not sure why it is, but we're just told that it is. What Putin said is, I'll show you what is an existential threat, which is when I lose terrain that I own. That's what's happening.
And you know what's ironic and perverse and disturbing is that Jim Sciutto from CNN earlier this year, I think in February or March, published a book and then some articles on CNN where he revealed for the first time that U.S. officials were aware that in late the fall of 2022, apparently Russia was close to using tactical nuclear weapons, and we had to do a lot of diplomacy. We specifically talked to the Russians. We talked to the Chinese. We're trying everybody to calm down because Russia had had some tactical setbacks in Kherson, in Kharkiv area, and those two things put them apparently right on the cusp of using them. Now, they solidified things afterwards, so that threat went down. But if you accomplish what you're saying here, we should have direct knowledge of what the consequences are, and yet we keep going forward.
Boy, that is a really fascinating point to point out. Jim Sciutto says, we worked hard to de-escalate from a nuclear tactical engagement, and we were successful, which then poses the question about the madman theory, right? Putin's a madman. He can't be controlled. He wants this. But if you're on the backside de-escalating, it demonstrates that there is room for negotiation. There is room for talk. So the other piece that we're not hearing, the other dog that's not barking in this sort of fight is, where is the discussion for a negotiated settlement? Where is the United States when it comes to terms of peace? They're not talking about peace. You just played clips throughout this show and others that talk about NATO expansion, talk about a win for Ukraine, how they're going to defeat Russia in this war, existential threats, all these things. But not once do we hear from the leadership in the White House, we'd love to see an end to this conflict. And don't forget, before we got to the invasion in 2022, Russia supported some sort of talk. They put a draft together about de-escalation, centralizing military power, similar to the Minsk agreement. We rejected that outright. And when Jake Sullivan explained why that was rejected, he was speaking for the national security establishment, saying it's not within our principles. What are the principles he's talking about? Again, defense of democracy, territorial integrity. So then with that, we have to go back and question the entire timeline of what happened in 2014 during the coup or the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych into what has now been transformed into a fight about the West against Russia. that has taken this escalation. When I wrote this article, what we're trying to point out is there is immediate danger. That's in the form of U.S. soldiers, combat trainers, advisors being able to be near battle. We're talking about CIA folks. We're talking about the State Department. Anybody that's in Ukraine right now fighting against Russia or on the periphery of that, that's an immediate danger. So when American bodies get killed in this conflict, it is another step in the escalation process, and we're not doing enough to provide protection against the Americans who didn't vote on this. Remember, Congress hasn't taken a vote to say, yes, we want to be in war here.
Right.
Voted over and again to support with funds, but we, the American people, have not been able to weigh in on this.
Yeah, that's why we're so grateful that you did weigh in with that Newsweek piece. And I want to look at a few of the specific things you put in there in the last amount of time we have here. Gary, if you can put that first one up there. You briefly mentioned this a second ago, but I wanted to bring it up for a specific reason. You wrote, NATO's failure to evolve to meet the challenges of the current world has significant implications for American interest and global stability. CIA Director and once U.S. Ambassador to Russia, William Burns, noted in 2008 that NATO's post-Cold War expansion would poke the Russian bear, so to speak, stating, quote, Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines to the Russian elite, not just Putin. And I have yet to find anyone who views Ukraine and NATO as anything other than a direct challenge to Russian interest. Now, that should have been, self-evident. I mean, a bright red line. Well, here's an interesting thing. Burns isn't the only one to recognize this. Last week, Trump was talking about to David Sachs, which we've highlighted on this show before. He's saying that he had recognized that this is something that was the cause of this war. Here's what he said.
To make a peace deal there, would you be willing to take NATO expansion off the table if that's what it took to get the Russians and the Ukrainians to make a deal? Would you be willing to do that?
So for 20 years, I heard that NATO, if Ukraine goes into NATO, it's a real problem for Russia. I've heard that for a long time. And I think that's really why this war started.
So if that's why the war started, then why would you want to put NATO or put NATO still on the table when you see that they've already gone to war? And there's a bunch of other things we could talk to that validate what he said there. Now, the implication that David Sachs had there was that he's not going to, or he would be willing to entertain taking NATO off the table if that's going to bring peace. What do you say to that?
Well, let's not ask Jason Beardsley. Let's ask Robert Gates. What Robert Gates once said famously was that everything in foreign policy that President Biden does is on the wrong side. So let's just assume that Robert Gates is right. He's smart. He's very apolitical, but he's been in these tough seats, and he's saying everything that Biden chooses is wrong. So if they're choosing to keep NATO on the table, I think that's maybe not the best idea. But so did the CIA director, current CIA director, Bill Burns, said that in 2008. So my point is, rather than relying on pundits and the folks in the audience here, we can go back to the experts who have worked for these people in their administrations currently working for them to hear what they said. And they said, this is a dumb idea. It should be taken off the table. It's going to be a red line. And you choose incorrectly every time there's a foreign policy disaster. So you put all that together, and you have this conversation that starts in the 90s, again, when we begin to expand NATO all the way up to 2004, when we said we're going to expand it even more, closer to Russia. And then 2008, when we say, now we're going to get to Ukraine and Georgia. And that's when Burns says, no, wait, if you do that, that's a bright red line, and it's going to cause a war. And then here we are some 10, 15 years later, and there's a war.
Proving it, yeah.
They proved it.
Exactly. Yeah. Gary, throw that third one up there, if you don't mind, the third call out. The next one I wanted to, because I thought it was really important, is you said to combat veterans, the problem is clear. America's military conflicts today lack traits that so often characterize our earlier campaigns. Today's wars are hive-minded affairs led by global coalitions. Their purposes is unclear, and often there's no discernible goal. Most Americans are either barely invested against these fights or are confused about what to think about them. There is a persistent refusal to engage with the world as it really is in favor of chasing idealistic hopes of democracy. This misguided pursuit often leads to disaster, leaving Americans to pay the cost. I think that's one of the key things of the article that you wrote there. I guess we've talked about it a little bit already. We don't seem to even know what we're trying to accomplish. And that's maybe the biggest issue with the administration's current push and most of the alliance push to push NATO into Ukraine. I don't know that anybody even knows what they want to accomplish. What is the end state?
Well, just hearing those words read back to me is painful. Writing those words is painful. It's painful because as a combat veteran, I suffered under the grand delusions, the utopian ideals that the United States government was leading us into. Again, we were going to win for democracy in places like Iraq and Afghanistan when all of us on the ground were watching something other than that happening. We were watching terrorists constantly, perniciously attacking and killing our troops, leaving us bleeding in the soils and burying our friends in Arlington. From that, the only outcome we were ever told was coming to us was some kind of nefarious state building affair that would lead to something. It's vague. It's ambiguous. Now we're back in Ukraine. We turned off the war funding to Afghanistan. We turned off the war funding to Iraq, although we're still in those places a little bit here and there. And now we turn on the spigot for somebody else because I think the leadership saw that we don't like to see our American soldiers in harm's way all the time. So let's let somebody else do it. And here are the poor Ukrainian people who have been teased into this. And if you talk to Ukrainians who have lived there, spent their lives in places like Donetsk and Luhansk, they've watched the fight with Russia. They've come to their own terms of agreement of who they are and where they live. They're not under the same illusions that Western elites are under, that there's some sort of happy world where Ukraine is completely separate from Moscow and allied to the West. That's not possible. It's not possible in the American sphere, and it's not really possible or probable in the Russian sphere unless we want to put American lives on the line over and over again to say something vague and ambiguous. And what you said is, hey, listen, we don't know why we're there. The only explanation you're getting is the one we referenced earlier. It's for democracy. Somehow it's for democracy. But was it for democracy when the Assistant Secretary of State and the ambassador in Ukraine were talking about manipulating their government officials so that the United States would have a pro-U.S. president in Kyiv instead of the pro-Russian one? Was that for democracy, or was that in our benefit? Was that in our interest? And I'm not arguing that we shouldn't do things in our interest, but our interest here is extremely low. You'd have to come up with something. And by the way, John McCain told us, I think 2 weeks ago, the one thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to keep these rare earth minerals away from the Russians. He talked about the financial gain. He was talking about the magic rocks we're going to dig out of the ground and save the world to build our cell phones, when in fact it's like, I don't think Americans want our troops or our money invested in Ukraine right now when we're suffering on the home front and we have the chance, the opportunity to be a better nation, to lead by example. And also,
and here's the ironic part. You don't need a war for that. Ukraine is more than happy to dig up their magic rocks or whatever and sell them. That doesn't help. I mean, just on the surface of it.
Well, if you listen to John McCain, that's what it's all for. And again, that means they keep changing the goalposts. In the beginning, it was something like defending Ukraine. In the middle, it was something like saving democracy for the world. Now we're getting more towards the hot spot when it's kind of like, well, what if we had rare earth minerals and we could mine their resources for years? And so we kept them out of the hands of the Russians.
Exploit them even more. I mean, we can help them even more. Yeah, that's part of this. Here's one of the really discouraging parts. You talked at a bit ago that said that where is any talk at all about a negotiated settlement? Where are we even seeking a peace? We're only talking about the military thing, but there is somebody who's talking about a negotiated settlement. And ironically, it's the other side, which continues to show that throughout this entire disaster and going back before it, the Russian side has always been willing to have a negotiated settlement to end the war. Here's what Putin said, I guess about a week or so ago, when he was asked while he was in Vietnam, what kind of reaction did you get from the West when you offered your peace proposals about 10 days ago? Here's what he said.
As for the reaction of our so-called Western partners, you said that I apparently did not expect it. No, on the contrary, I expected exactly this kind of reaction at the initial stage. But what will happen later, time will tell. Everything will depend on how the situation on the ground changes. I think that some reasonable politicians will still think about whether the proposals I made are realistic, objective, and in line with the interests of all negotiating parties and all of Europe, if it really wants to end the conflict in the center of Europe. I am not sure that such an attitude towards our proposals will last forever. Even now, there are voices from some politicians saying that yes, it might be an ultimatum, yes, excessive demands, but we cannot refuse. We need to think and figure it out.
Wow.
I mean, he even says, yeah, these are harsh demands. And as I think you and I have talked about before, the longer we wait, the worse the demands are going to get, the worse deal that Ukraine's going to get. And he seemed to be saying that here too, that this offer I just made, it has an expiration date. And I think that if he doesn't get what he's looking for here, he'll just continue until he burns on the battlefield what he couldn't get in negotiations.
You just heard from someone who has, he gave you the plan. He just gave you the playbook. And if you can't hear it, here's what he said. Okay, you don't want my peace plan now. That's fine. I'll keep killing Ukrainians. We're going to increase our attacks. I've got 700,000 people mustered on the borders and in the regions of the 4 oblasts that I want. I'm going to make it hurt so bad that even your unreasonable politicians are going to want the out. He's telling you, just like they used to tell us down at the beach at Coronado, they would yell in the bullhorns, you can do this the easy way or you can do this the hard way. You guys didn't want to do it the easy way, so now we're going to take the hard way. What's the hard way? I'm going to make it hurt. And by the way, that's why you see the United States expanding our policy every single quarter of this fight. At first, we weren't going to give them HIMARS. Then we did. We weren't going to give them F-16s. Then we did. We weren't going to give them long-range attack systems. And then we did. And we weren't going to let them attack into Russia. And now we do. So all of a sudden, we're now coming off a weekend where we just put ATACMS or, and when I say we, what maybe the American people don't know, these advisors, these trainers inside Ukraine are there to help one with these weapon systems. These are very sophisticated weapon systems that need the United States, the intelligence, the apparatus of the air dominance, everything we've brought to the table. When an ATACMS is being fired, we're on the backside of that. So when an ATACMS long-range missile goes into Crimea and splashes down on a beach, or the defense missiles of Russia splash down on a beach, we're involved with that. When missiles go into Russian territory, we're involved with this because we said it's okay. And so again, I'm pointing out something here. Over time, if you listen to the American leadership, the U.S. government leadership, you'll hear a whiplash of changing ideas, changing policies, expanding policies, all leading to escalation. And you're not once hear terms of negotiated settlements. You will not hear Jake Sullivan, John Kirby, President Biden. You won't hear White House speaking about how do we get to the table? How do we make the deal? So what you're hearing is Vladimir Putin saying, okay, you don't want to come to the deal on my terms, then you'll get there when my terms become an offer you can't refuse. So that's where we are.
Yeah, that is where we are. And we're just going to have to I just hope and pray that at some point, either the pain gets enough to where we finally do what's right and bring this war to an end, or that even better, that somehow we just, get this epiphany that this is a losing play here and we'll change course and do what makes sense, what's possible.
If we love Ukraine, if we really do support Ukraine, if we want to showcase the flag, then you brought this up the last time we spoke. There's a humanitarian backside to the story where every day young Ukrainian men and even old Ukrainian men are pressed into service for a fight they're probably not even close to being able to win. So the more we expend those lives and extend this line, the more we're going to say we don't actually like Ukraine. We don't care enough about them to give them the protection they deserve as a nation that is not able to defeat Russia. If they were, they could do it on their own, but they're not, which is why we're there. So for Americans who love Ukraine and want to put that flag on their lapel, they need to be smart about what they're asking Ukrainian men and women to do every day as they go into battle with the superior force.
That's exactly what we should do. And we'll just have to hope that that's what happens here. Thanks for coming on today, Jason, and clearing us up on a lot of this stuff. And thanks for writing that piece there. I know we're about to head in. Everybody's going to be all cheerleading and everything when the NATO summit comes up here in a couple of weeks. But we're going to keep exposing the reality of it, that here's what we should be doing instead. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks for the work you're doing. You've got to keep exposing it, because the more Americans realize what is happening here, I think the less involved they are and the more they want to say, take care of Americans first.
That's the way it should go. That's supposed to be the normal thing. And we thank you guys for coming on today as well. Ask you to be sure to like and subscribe to this. We also have a new feature here where you can join as an exclusive membership. You'll see that join button on your screen there, especially on the desktop. Be sure to click that because there's all kinds of exclusive content and shows that we do that are just for you guys. We did another one on Friday. It was really, really great for all those. And we appreciate the ones who've already signed up. Really enjoy that because I get to engage directly with you guys, and we're going to continue to do that. Also, we got another couple of shows this afternoon. A lot of things have been happening that directly affect the situation we just discussed here. There was a couple of terrorist attacks, actually 3, depending on how you want to count it. In Russia, then that says 19 were killed. At least another one of those has succumbed, and now that the total is 20. We're going to talk about that at 12:30 today. About what the current situation is and what the Russian response is. And then at 2 o'clock, we've got the ever popular and famous Alexander Mercouris, who's going to talk about what the Kremlin has been saying and what we better be watching out for. Be sure to tune into those. You're not going to want to miss them. Send these to your friends and let them know so they can join as well. And we will see you at 12:30 on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.